Hi, I'm Kimberly Williams, and this is my paper, Making Room for the Spirit, Encouraging Exploration of the Ineffable Self as a Form of Self-Care Through Creative Writing. This is a conference paper in 3 parts. It includes an argument, it includes a contextual narrative, and the last part is some approaches with notes, and I will not be reading that part. I will read the first 2 parts, and then I will save the last part for the half an hour breakout session live. It will be quite short, but this way I stay closer to the time limit. So this is part 1, the argument. In an era that openly struggles with religious views that divide us, it can be tempting for writing instructors to avoid certain topics, like the religious, the spiritual, or the ineffable self altogether. At the same time, self-care for many humans, creative writers included, means tending to the spirit, or what I refer to as the ineffable self. This is the self that many people sense exists beyond our physical bodies or intellectual minds. For some, it may be expressed as intuition, spirit, or the soul. For others, the form of it is hard to pin down with language, hence the word ineffable. For many writers, it is not enough to tend to just the body or just to mental and physical well-being. Additionally, for some, it is not enough to tend to just the intellect. For some, the holistic approach to self includes all of these components, along with the ineffable self, the self that eludes or challenges language sometimes. As a poet, I turn to how we use language to illustrate my point. The phrases crisis of spirit and crisis of faith tell us much. In English, we don't have the phrase crisis of the body or crisis of the intellect. However, we do have the existential crisis as well as the midlife crisis. All of these are ineffable crises, hard to pin down and explain, but which are certainly recognizable when experienced. And they are the type of crises that have kept writers at their art for centuries. Thus, this place where language meets imagination is one spot where students can be challenged to use the creative process, the intuition that comes with it, and meaning, which I see as language and form, to explore and understand their own ontological and or spiritual impulses and needs more fully. In his article, Teaching Spirituality and Work, a Praxis-Based Pedagogy, David C. Trott asserts that, quote, when students come to colleges and universities, they are questing. They are in search of knowledge, skills, and abilities related to their chosen or soon-to-be chosen professions. They are, however, in search of much, much more. Many students are seeking their sense of place in the world, a sense of purpose in their work, a sense of being, becoming, transforming into a more fully holistically developed person, end quote. Notably, Trott is a business professor, and this paper was published in Management Learning in 2012. In this paper, Trott goes on to say that, quote, some scholars regard the highest level of one's work a calling, but answering a call presumes a capacity to hear. One's inner voice is the most important. I want my students to be searingly conscious of their own voice, end quote. What other discipline so directly allows students to examine a calling or to become searingly conscious of their own voices, if not creative writing? To study creative writing in the first place can be interpreted as an act of faith. It is not a discipline where one is guaranteed work upon completion of the degree. People who are drawn to writing often come to it as a calling. So here I ask, in a pandemic-shaped world, how are we designing our pedagogy and our curriculum to foster this part of our students' needs? How are we helping them find purpose in their work and explore and come to an understanding of a holistic sense of themselves if we are not encouraging the exploration of their ineffable selves through our curriculum? Francis Gilbert, in his article published just this year, Why Teach Creative Writing, examining the challenges of its pedagogies, admits that, quote, creative writing, unlike so many subjects, embraces the horrors and wonders of life. Death, anger, injustice, burning desire, and so forth. To explore why we are teaching creative writing is, in part, to clasp deadly terrors, end quote. Gilbert's implication here is that we, as creative writing instructors, are in the best position to enable the deep exploration of these topics for our students. And these topics, the deadly terrors, generally come as part and parcel of the ontological, or, if you like, the ineffable. There are many practical reasons to not consider the ineffable self in creative writing classes. The fear of promoting religion, the fear of not separating church and state, the fear of stepping on toes, the fear of excluding one person's beliefs for another. Where I live right now in Australia, in the capital city, amongst a highly educated and secular population, it's evident that there is an outright mistrust of religion. Driving or walking around, a person has to really look for the churches. People here seem almost proud of having such a secular bias. But sometimes it's the proverbial throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And chucking organized religion, the whole spirit may get lost. Yet religion and spirituality are not always the same, though for some students they might be. Either way, in avoiding that which makes us uncomfortable, we may be leaving out a most important part of self-care for our students, the care of the ineffable self. As such, we run the following risks: missing the greatest opportunity to help our students care for themselves at the deepest level through their own creativity, missing opportunities to help students connect with other students and their own writing at the deepest level through their own creativity. In fact, although clearly earnestly inclusive, the call for papers for this conference invited submissions that, quote, challenge disciplinary conceptions and practices, end quote. And yet in all of the examples and threads given in the CFP, this critical part of the human being was noticeably omitted. I ask, how can we care for our students if we are not encouraging them through our pedagogy and curriculum to delve into ontological and or spiritual deepness? How can we hope to be caring for them if we don't foster this kind of self-discovery? This paper does not suggest that creative writing instructors should in any way serve as ministers or spiritual advisors, but simply that we could be encouraging students' own exploration of these ideas and topics if their interest in writing takes them in that direction. If we are truly caring for our students' whole selves, the ineffable self may be part of many students' identity, or simply put, a part of the humanity that they may wish to bring to themselves and explore through the intersection of imagination and language. Part 2, the contextual narrative. When I was in graduate school the first time in the mid-1990s, I was working on a PhD in English literature, not creative writing. I felt overwhelmed, and I was emotionally immature at the time. I felt unsupported, as many graduate students do, so I abruptly left my program and moved to South America. I didn't realize it until decades later, but part of my dissatisfaction with the program was that I was studying these incredibly meaningful works of literature, and we were only analyzing them in certain privileged ways. To use Trott's words, I was questing. And when my PhD work left me feeling empty and meaningless, though the works I was reading were incredibly meaningful, I left with my master's degree in hand and took myself on a literal quest to a different part of the world. 15 years later, I found myself in an MFA program through the University of Texas, El Paso. I was going part-time while teaching writing full-time at a community college. This time, I was more mature and I was more committed and thus open to whatever my professors had planned for me. Unexpectedly, one semester, in a fiction writing class, I read Swedenborg because it was assigned. Swedenborg, the rational geologist who became obsessed with angels in the second half of his life. From Swedenborg, we read Edward Hirsch's The Demon and the Angel. We read Garcia Lorca and Isabel Allende. We studied Duende and thought about creative source as part of our creative processes. I was completely stunned. Without realizing it, this was the class I had waited my whole life for, and it wasn't even poetry. The professor who taught this course, Daniel Chacon, eventually became my primary MFA thesis advisor simply because he, of all the professors in the program, got the best writing out of me because his approach allowed me to follow my impulse and explore the ineffable. I also knew I could follow this impulse in writing my thesis, and I would be supported. Though Chacon writes poems, his specialty is not poetry, and I was writing a book of poems. Yet he supported my work and my lines of inquiry. He was the first professor who allowed me to use my poetry, that thing which brought me the most meaning to my life, to explore the ineffable. For me, it was life-changing work. All he did was facilitate it. I would like to emphasize that in Chacon's class, at no time did the curriculum become religious. At no time did it become didactic. It wasn't Christian, though I would say parts of it were mystical. And certainly it was square in the realm of the ineffable. But if the student wanted to understand it that way, they could. And if they didn't want to understand it that way, they didn't have to. They were still reading Garcia Lorca, Allende, Edward Hirsch, amongst others, and they were getting to know Swedenborg from a literary history point of view. In the preface to his book, Hirsch explains that, quote, the duende, or the demon, and the angel are vital spirits of the creative imagination. Awe bears traces of the holy. It is both rapturous and terrifying because it puts one in a space of the transcendental, the world beyond. The demon and the angel are two external figures of a power that dwells deep within us. They are the imagination's liberating agents who unleash their primal force into works of art. End quote. When Chacon had us explore these topics, he did it at the level of metaphor. What he gave us, his students, was an invitation to explore the power that Hirsch describes here. And I assert that if we are caring for our own students as holistically as possible, that we need to create classes that foster their own explorations and growth into the inevitable. Admittedly, this is not everyone's comfort zone. My question then is, how can writing instructors do this while managing the uncertainty? So that is the end of my paper for now. Again, I'll offer part 3, some approaches with notes, in the first few minutes of the 30-minute session. Thanks for listening.